Now back to our American so-called friends and partners. They were in the first stage until 2018. All this time, Putin kindly persuaded them to ratify the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, updated in 1999, tried to agree on the non-expansion of NATO to the east, urged them not to build missile defense bases in Eastern Europe and not to withdraw from the key treaty to eliminate intermediate and short-range missiles, that is, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. It didn't help. They chose option B, refusing to talk to Russia, considering Russia too weak and useless. Then Putin made the necessary decisions, and in 2018, when the latest Russian weapons were demonstrated, the situation for the partners worsened. At that moment, they moved to the second stage, and now tougher proposals have come from Russia than those voiced by Putin before. For example, before we didn't insist on legally binding written guarantees of non-expansion of NATO and didn't talk about the return of this organization to the 1997 borders, but only insisted on the neutral status of Ukraine and Georgia. And now, these points have appeared in the draft agreements and treaties on security assurances with NATO and the United States, and they have appeared in the form of imperatives, that is, unconditional requirements in one package, and not in the form of a list of proposals that can be discussed, and then some of them adjusted and adopted, and some of them rejected. But as we see, they were received with hostility, and are regarded both in the United States and in NATO, and also by the European politicians, at least as unacceptable and extremely brazen proposals, and at most as blackmail and threats. Many European politicians, for some reason, think that Putin is bluffing and trying to intimidate them, and that they have choice. After 2 rounds of talk with the US and NATO delegation, enthusiastic exclamations were heard from Ukraine that Putin's attempt to frighten someone there, to force them to accept the proposals, had failed. Naive people. They never realized that these were not suggestions, but the last warning before moving on to the next, third stage. To those who do not know Putin well, it may seem that he really decided to intimidate Europe and the United States and force them to accept our conditions with the help of a swoop. However, I am inclined to believe that Putin is a kind, very kind person, and gives his partners the last chance, with honor and dignity, that is, without losing face, to get out of the difficult situation in which the United States found itself after a series of inglorious geopolitical defeats, starting with the return of Crimea by Russia and ending with a shameful flight from Afghanistan. Putin gives the US a chance to still maintain the NATO bloc and influence in Europe by agreeing with Russia on a new division of the world into spheres of influence. But you and I, unlike inadequate European and American politicians, know Putin very well and understand that if he takes such a step, he realizes that he put his reputation and the reputation of the country on the line. After all, in the event of refusal and inability of our country to insist on its own, Russia can become a laughing stock for the whole world, a country that will not be reckoned with, like with a person unable to back up his words with actions, and Putin himself will be perceived by everyone as a windbag. Therefore, Putin would definitely not take a risk to become dishonored and disgraced by putting forward such stringent demands without having the strongest trump cards up his sleeve, with which he could force the United States to collect their belongings and get out, saying goodbye to NATO and to the role of the world hegemon in case of refusal to voluntarily conclude a treaty with Russia. What these trump cards will be, or rather what will be our military response, which both the President and our diplomats directly speak about, we can only guess, but I have no doubt that it will be. We probably have some kind of a plan, the implementation of which will lead to the fact that NATO may simply cease to exist, and America will lose both its face and the role of a superpower. Therefore, I will repeat once again that Putin could be kind to them because he took a risk and gave them this chance, but the Americans did not understand and did not appreciate this, and they are unlikely to understand it in the remaining days. However, it seems to me that by putting forward such serious and harsh conditions, we deliberately run into an arrogant refusal, so that later the partners bite their nails in annoyance that they cannot reproach and accuse us of anything, and they themselves are to blame for everything around. Our leadership is well aware that a certain window of opportunity is open now, and we must quickly take advantage of this. And if the Americans suddenly agree, this will not ensure our security, because it has long been clear to everyone that written agreements with the United States are not even worth the paper on which they are written.